Welcome back, my friends. Today, we are going to listen to the fascinating story of how the Vikings reached North America before Columbus. This is not only a story about ships, storms, warriors, and the sea. It is also a story about courage, curiosity, survival, and one of the most interesting journeys in world history. Many people learned in school that Christopher Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492, but long before that, Norse explorers from northern Europe had already traveled across the ocean and reached the shores of North America. This story is especially interesting for listeners in Canada because part of the evidence is found in Newfoundland at a place called Meadows. Archaeologists discovered remains of a Norse settlement. This place shows that Vikings were present in North America around 1,000 years ago. They did not create a large empire there. They did not stay forever, but they arrived, built, worked, repaired ships, and left traces behind. Those traces became proof that the Atlantic world was connected earlier than many people once believed. But before we continue, we must say something clearly. The Vikings did not discover a completely empty land. Indigenous peoples had already lived in North America for thousands of years. They had their own communities, cultures, languages, knowledge, and deep relationship with the land. So in this story, we should not say the Vikings discovered North America as if no one was there before them. It is more accurate to say they reached North America from Europe before Columbus. That difference matters. It respects the people who were already living there. So who were the Vikings? The word Viking is often used for Norse people from places like Norway, Denmark, and Sweden during the Viking Age. Some were raiders, some were traders, some were farmers, some were explorers. They lived in a world of cold seas, long winters, rocky coasts, small farms, and strong family ties. Their lives were shaped by the sea. The ocean could be dangerous, but it could also be a road. To many people, the Atlantic looked like a barrier. To the Vikings, it became a path. The secret of their journey was the Viking ship. Their ships were light, strong, and flexible. They could travel across open water, but they could also move close to shore and enter rivers. These ships were not huge, like later European ships, but they were clever. They were built for speed and movement. When the wind was good, sails carried them forward. When needed, men could row. The long shape of the ship helped it cut through waves. The shallow bottom made it useful near coasts. For the Vikings, the ship was not only a tool, it was freedom. Imagine a Viking crew leaving the shore. The air is cold. The sea is dark. The sail rises in the wind. Men sit close together inside the wooden ship. Some watch the clouds. Some watch the birds. Some look at the color of the water. There is no modern engine, no satellite map, and no safe harbor waiting every night. The sea is open and dangerous. A storm can destroy everything. Fog can hide the land. Cold can weaken the body, but still, they sail forward. The Viking journey west did not happen in one simple step. It happened slowly. From one place to another, Norse people moved from Scandinavia to islands in the North Atlantic. They reached places like the Faroe Islands and Iceland. Later, they reached Greenland. Each step took courage, but each step also made the next step possible. When people settled in Iceland, the ocean beyond Iceland became less impossible. When people settled in Greenland, the land farther west became more tempting. Greenland was important in this story. It was harsh and difficult. But Norse settlers lived there for centuries. From Greenland, the distance to North America was much shorter. Stories tell of land seen to the west. Maybe a ship was blown off course. Maybe sailors heard reports from others. Maybe curiosity pushed them forward. In any case, the Vikings began to imagine that there was more land beyond Greenland. For explorers, that question can be powerful. What is beyond the horizon? One famous name connected with this journey is Leif Erikson. He was a Norse explorer, often linked to the first known European voyage to North America. The stories say he reached a land called Vinland. Scholars have debated exactly where Vinland was and how far the Norse traveled, but the site at Meadows in Newfoundland gives strong evidence that Norse people reached North America and built a temporary settlement there. The old stories and the archaeology meet in a powerful way. For modern people, this changes how we imagine history. It shows that history is not always a straight line. It is not always one famous event and one famous name. Before Columbus, before large European empires in the Americas, before modern maps, there were Norse sailors crossing cold waters in wooden ships. They did not know the full size of the world. They did not know they were part of a story. People would discuss 1,000 years later. They were looking for land, wood, trade, survival, and opportunity. This is the first lesson from the Viking journey to North America. Exploration often begins with need and curiosity. The Vikings were not simply chasing adventure for fun. They were looking for resources, land, trade, and new possibilities. Their world was difficult, but their ships gave them the power to move step by step, island by island. They crossed the North Atlantic and reached the edge of a continent, and somewhere on the rugged coast of Newfoundland, the story left a mark. A small settlement, far from Norway and far from the old Viking homelands, became one of the most important clues in the history of Atlantic exploration. The question is no longer, did the Vikings reach North America? The better question is, how did they do it? And why did they not stay? To understand how the Vikings reached North America, we first need to understand who they were. In many movies and pictures, Vikings are shown only as fierce warriors with axes, shields, and angry faces. That image is partly true, but it is not complete. The Vikings were not only raiders, they were also farmers, traders, sailors, shipbuilders, storytellers, craftsmen, and explorers. They came from Northern Europe, especially from areas we now call Norway, Denmark, and Sweden. Their world was cold, rough, and deeply connected to the sea. Life in Scandinavia was not always easy. The land could be rocky, winters could be long. Good farmland was limited in many areas. Families had to work hard to survive. People raised animals, grew crops, fished, hunted, made tools, and traded goods. In some places, there was not enough land for every family to grow rich. This created pressure. Some people looked outward. They looked across the sea and asked a simple question: what can we find beyond our own coast? This question helped shape the Viking Age. Some Norse people traveled to raid wealthy places. Others traveled to trade. Others moved to settle new lands. They reached the British Isles, Ireland, France, Iceland, Greenland, Russia, and other regions. They sold and exchanged goods such as furs, iron, amber, walrus ivory, cloth, weapons, and silver. They also connected different parts of Europe through rivers and seas. Their world was larger than many people imagine. A Viking ship could carry warriors one year, traders another year, and settlers with animals and tools another time. The Vikings were also practical people. Their society valued courage, reputation, family honor, loyalty, and skill. A person's name and memory mattered. Stories were important. Before many things were written down, people remembered history through spoken tales, around fires, inside halls, or during long winters. People told stories of leaders, voyage, battles, gods, monsters, and distant lands. These stories were not always perfectly accurate, but they carried memory. They helped people understand who they were and where they came from. The Viking world also had a strong religious and cultural imagination before Christianity spread widely in the north. Many Norse people believed in gods such as Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki. They imagined a world filled with fate, spirits, Gion, sacred places, and powerful signs. The sea was not only water, it was danger, mystery, and possibility. A storm could feel like more than weather. A voyage could feel like a test of courage. This mindset made exploration meaningful. Not only practical, but the greatest tool of Viking expansion was the ship. Without their ships, the Vikings could not have reached so many places. Their ships were built with skill and deep knowledge of water, wood, wind, and movement. Viking shipbuilders did not use modern machines, but they understood design. They knew how to make a ship light enough to move quickly, strong enough to survive rough seas, and flexible enough to handle waves. The wooden boards were often overlapped, creating a strong outer shell. This method helped the ship move well through water. There were different kinds of Viking ships. Some long ships were built for speed, raids, and movement along coasts and rivers. They could carry warriors and move quickly. Their shallow design allowed them to land on beaches or travel into rivers where larger ships could not go. This gave Vikings surprise. They did not always need a harbor. They could appear suddenly, attack, trade, or escape before enemies were ready. Other ships were wider and stronger for carrying cargo, families, animals, and supplies. These ships were important for settlement. To cross the North Atlantic, people needed more than courage. They needed food, tools, wood, animals, clothing, and space. A ship going to Iceland or Greenland was not only carrying people, it was carrying the beginning of a new life. This is why Viking ships were not only war machines, they were vehicles of migration. Navigation was another amazing part of the Viking story. The Vikings did not have modern maps, radios, or engines. They had to read the natural world. They watched the sun, stars, wind, waves, clouds, birds, and sea color. Birds could suggest that land was near. Ocean currents could guide direction. The smell of the air could change near land. Experienced sailors used memory and observation. They learned routes through practice, risk, and storytelling. The ocean was dangerous, but it was not empty to them. It was full of signs. Imagine standing on a Viking ship in the North Atlantic. The water is cold and dark. The wind pulls the sail. The ship rises and falls with the waves. There is no guarantee that land will appear. Man looking to fog. Someone watches the birds, Someone checks the direction of the wind. Supplies are limited. A mistake can mean death. In that moment, exploration is not romantic. It is frightening, difficult, and real. This is why the Viking journey to North America is so impressive. They did not cross the ocean with modern technology. They crossed it with wooden ships, human skill, memory, courage, and deep knowledge of the sea. They moved from one island world to another, slowly pushing farther west. Norway led to Iceland. Iceland led to Greenland. Greenland opened the door to North America. The Viking ship changed history because it turned the sea into a road. It allowed Norse people to raid, trade, settle, and explore across huge distances. It connected cold northern farms to rich cities and distant islands. It carried fear to some places, goods to others, and families to new homes. And eventually, it carried Norse sailors toward the coast of Newfoundland. This is the second lesson from the Viking story. Great journeys are not made by courage alone. They need tools, knowledge, skill, and people trained by their environment. The Vikings came from a world of cold seas and hard choices. Their ships gave them movement. Their courage gave them direction, and their curiosity pushed them beyond the edge of the known world. The Viking journey to North America did not begin with one ship sailing directly from Norway to Canada. It was a slow movement across the North Atlantic, from one island to another. Over many generations, this is important to understand. The Vikings did not simply look at a map and choose a final destination. They did not know the full shape of the world. They moved step by step, following stories, winds, coastlines, birds, and the hope of new land. For many Norse people, the journey began in Scandinavia. Places like Norway had long coastlines, deep fjords, cold waters, and limited farmland in some areas. Life could be beautiful, but it could also be difficult. Families needed land for animals and farming. Young people wanted opportunity. Leaders wanted power. Traders wanted goods. Sailors wanted new routes. These pressures pushed some people outward. The sea was dangerous. But staying home was not always easy either. Norway was especially important in the westward story. Its coast faced the North Atlantic. From there, sailors could move toward islands that seemed far away, but not impossible. The first steps west were not always about conquest. Sometimes they were about settlement, trade, and survival. A family might leave with tools, animals, food, cloth, weapons, and hope. They were not only traveling, they were carrying a future inside a wooden ship. The Faroe Islands became one stepping stone. These islands lie in the cold North Atlantic, between Norway, Scotland, and Iceland. They were small compared with great kingdoms, but for ocean travelers, they mattered. Each island could become a place to rest, settle, repair, and learn more about the sea. The Viking world expanded not by one giant jump, but by creating small points of connection across the ocean. Then came Iceland. Iceland was a major step in the Viking movement west. Norse settlers reached Iceland in the late 9th century. For them, Iceland was not just another island. It was a new world of volcanoes, glaciers, grasslands, rivers, and rough weather. It was far from Norway, but still connected by sea routes and memory. People brought animals, built farms, created communities, and developed a society that would preserve many Norse stories. Imagine the first settlers arriving in Iceland. The ship moves toward a strange coastline. Mountains rise in the distance. Steam may rise from hot springs. The air feels cold and open. There are no familiar villages waiting for them. They must choose land, build shelters, protect animals, and survive the first winter. A new settlement was not romantic at the beginning. It was hard work, uncertainty, and risk. But Iceland gave the Norse people something powerful. It gave them a base farther west. Once people lived in Iceland, the ocean beyond Iceland became part of their world. Sailors traveled between Norway and Iceland. Families stayed connected. Stories moved with them. News of storms, islands, coastlines, and strange sightings could spread from one community to another. Over time, the edge of the known world moved farther away from Iceland. The next great step was Greenland. The story of Greenland is often connected with Eric the Red. He was a strong and controversial figure in Norse tradition. After trouble in Iceland, he sailed west and found land. He later encouraged others to settle there. The name Greenland may have been used to make the land sound attractive to settlers, but the reality was difficult. Greenland was cold, harsh, and demanding. Still, Norse communities were established there. Greenland changed everything. It placed Norse settlers much closer to North America. From western Greenland, the distance to lands across the water was much shorter than the distance from Norway. The Norse did not need to cross the entire Atlantic in one impossible voyage. They had already built a chain of movement, Norway, to the Atlantic Islands, then Iceland, then Greenland. Each step made the next step more possible. Life in Greenland was not easy. The Norse settlers raised animals, hunted, traded, built churches and farms, and tried to survive in a difficult environment. They needed wood, iron, food, and trade goods. But Greenland had limited trees. This created a practical problem. Wood was essential for building, repairing ships, making tools, and daily life. If there was land farther west with more trees, that land would be valuable. This need for resources may help explain why the Norse looked toward North America. They were not only searching for adventure, they needed useful things. They needed wood. They may have wanted animal products, trade goods, or new places for settlement. When stories spread about land to the west, people had reason to investigate. Curiosity and need worked together. Some stories say that sailors saw unknown land after being blown off course. This is believable because the North Atlantic can be unpredictable. A storm can push a ship far away from its planned route. Fog can hide direction. Wind can change quickly. A sailor who missed Greenland might see a different coast and return with news. In a world without modern maps, accidental discovery could become the beginning of planned exploration. Leif Erikson is the most famous explorer connected to the voyage from Greenland to North America. According to Norse tradition, he heard of land to the west and sailed to investigate. The stories describe different places, including lands with flat stones, forests, and grapes or berries. These places were given names such as Helluland, Markland, and Vinland. Scholars still debate the exact meanings and locations, but the general direction is clear. The Norse were exploring west from Greenland toward North America. This movement shows how exploration often happens. It begins with pressure at home, then comes travel, then settlement, then new information, then another journey. The Vikings reached North America because they had already learned how to live across the North Atlantic. Their ships, skills, and settlements created a path across cold water. This is the third lesson from the Viking journey. Big historical moments often depend on many smaller steps. Norway led to the islands. The islands led to Iceland. Iceland led to Greenland. Greenland opened the door to North America. By the time Norse sailors looked west from Greenland, they were not facing a completely unknown ocean. They were following a chain of courage built by earlier travelers, and beyond that cold western water, another shore was waiting. It was not empty. It was not theirs. But it would become the place where Norse explorers left one of the most important clues in the history of Canada. Leif Erikson is one of the most famous names in the story of Vikings reaching North America. He was a Norse explorer, connected with Greenland, Iceland, and the wider Viking world of the North Atlantic. His story sits between history, archaeology, and Norse. The sagas were stories written down later, based on older oral traditions. They are not the same as modern history books, but they preserve important memories when we read them carefully and compare them with archaeological evidence. A fascinating picture begins to appear. According to tradition, Leif Erikson was the son of Eric the Red, the man strongly connected with Norse settlement in Greenland. This matters because Greenland was the bridge to North America from Norway. The Western Ocean was huge and frightening, but from Greenland, the distance to the lands of North America was much shorter. Norse sailors living in Greenland had a reason to look west. They needed wood, resources, trade goods, and new opportunities. The land across the water was not only a mystery, it could also be useful. The stories say that Leif heard about land to the west. In some versions, another sailor had seen unknown land after being blown off course. Leif then prepared a voyage to explore it. This detail feels very real. Many discoveries in history did not begin with a perfect plan. They began with accident, rumor, need, and curiosity. Someone sees something, someone tells a story. Another person decides to follow it. That is how a small piece of information can become a journey. Imagine Leif and his crew leaving Greenland. The air is cold. The sea is rough. Their wooden ship moves through waves. There is no modern compass system like today. No engine. No radio. No satellite map. The sailors must read the sky. Wind, water, birds, and memory. Every day at sea brings risk. A storm could break the journey. Fog could hide direction. Cold water could kill quickly. But the crew keeps moving west, searching for signs of land. The sagas describe several lands. One was called Helluland, often understood as a land of flat stones. Another was called Markland, often understood as a forest land. Another was called Vinland, the most famous name in the story. Scholars have debated exactly where these places were. Some may connect with parts of Baffin Island, Labrador, and Newfoundland. Though the exact routes are still discussed, what matters for our story is this. The Norse were moving along the northeastern edge of North America, seeing different landscapes, and trying to understand what they had found. Vinland became the most memorable name. In the stories, it was a land with useful resources and a milder feeling than Greenland. Some people connect the name with grapes. Others suggest it may relate to fields or pasture. Whatever the exact meaning, Vinland represented possibility. For Norse settlers in Greenland, a place with wood and resources would have been valuable. Greenland had very limited trees, ships, houses, tools, and repairs all needed wood, so a land with forests could change life This is where the story becomes especially important for Canada, at Meadows, in Newfoundland. Archaeologists found the remains of a Norse site. The site included traces of buildings, workshops, ironworking, and activities connected with a temporary settlement. This was not a giant Viking city. It was not a permanent empire. It was more like a base, a place where people stayed, worked, repaired, gathered materials, and prepared for movement. But its meaning is huge. It shows that Norse people reached North America around 1,000 years ago. That means they arrived roughly 500 years before Columbus crossed the Atlantic in 1492. But again, we must be careful with language. The Vikings did not discover an empty land. Indigenous peoples were already living in North America, with long histories and deep knowledge of the land. The Norse arrival was a European arrival, not the beginning of human history there. This is why the title says they reached North America before Columbus. It is more accurate and more respectful. The Norse may have met indigenous peoples during their time in North America. The sagas mention encounters with people they called Skraelings. These meetings were not simple. There may have been trade, misunderstanding, fear, and conflict. Imagine two very different worlds meeting on a cold coast. The Norse came from Greenland and the North Atlantic. Indigenous peoples belonged to the land and knew it far better. They had their own languages, tools, social systems, and survival knowledge. For both sides, the encounter must have been strange and uncertain. The Norse were skilled sailors and explorers, but they were few in number. They were far from their home bases. Supplies were limited, reinforcements were difficult. The local indigenous population knew the land, seasons, resources, and dangers. This made long-term settlement difficult for the Norse. Reaching a place is one achievement. Staying there is a completely different challenge. Still, the achievement was remarkable. Leif Erikson and other Norse explorers crossed one of the most dangerous ocean routes in the world, using wooden ships and human skill. They moved from Scandinavia to Iceland, from Iceland to Greenland, and from Greenland to North America. They were not using modern technology. They were using experience, courage, ship design, and observation. Their journey shows how powerful human curiosity can be when combined with practical knowledge. This is the fourth lesson from the Viking journey. History often changes when people cross a boundary that others think is impossible. For the Vikings, the Atlantic was not only an obstacle, it became a route. But their story also teaches us humility. Reaching a land does not mean owning it. Arriving does not mean beginning its history. The Norse journey was important because it connected Europe and North America earlier than many people once believed, but it was only one chapter in a much larger human story. On the coast of Newfoundland, the wind still moves across the land. The sea still strikes the rocks, and beneath the quiet ground, traces of that journey remained for centuries. Waiting to be found, Meadows is one of the most important places in the story of Vikings in North America. It is located in Newfoundland, on the eastern edge of Canada. Today, the place can look quiet and open. There is wind, grass, sea, and a feeling of distance. But around 1,000 years ago, Norse travelers came to this coast. They built structures, worked with tools, repaired ships, and left behind small traces that later became powerful evidence. Those traces helped change how modern people understand Atlantic history. The Norse site at Meadows was not a great Viking city. It was not a large kingdom. It was not a permanent colony like later European settlements. It was more likely a temporary base. That is what makes it interesting. The Vikings may have used it as a place to rest, repair ships, gather resources, and explore nearby lands. For Norse people living in Greenland, a place like this could be useful. Greenland had limited wood, and wood was extremely important. Ships needed repairs. Houses needed materials, tools, boxes, fires, and daily life all depended on wood in some way. Imagine the scene at the settlement. A longship rests near the shore. Smoke rises from a simple building. People work with iron and wood. Some repair tools. Some prepare food. Some watch the sea. Others look toward the forest and the unknown land beyond. The air is cold and clean. The ocean is never far away. For the Norse, this place was both hopeful and dangerous. It offered resources, but it was also far from their homes, far from help, and surrounded by a world they did not fully understand. Archaeological evidence shows that Norse people were there, but it also shows that their presence was limited. They did not build a large town. They did not create deep roots. They did not become a permanent European society in North America. This raises an important question. If they were skilled sailors, and if they reached the land before Columbus, why did they not stay forever? One reason was distance. The Norse base in Greenland was already difficult to support. Life there required hard work, trade, animals, and careful survival. North America was even farther from the main Norse world. Sending people, supplies, tools, and support across cold seas was not easy. A settlement far from help can become weak quickly. If a ship is damaged, if food runs low, or if winter becomes harsh, survival becomes dangerous. Another reason was numbers. The Norse who reached North America were probably not many. A small group can explore, build a temporary camp, and collect resources. But long-term settlement needs families, food systems, defense, trade, and steady support. Indigenous peoples already lived in the region and knew the land far better. The Norse were visitors in a world that belonged to others. They did not have the population strength to control or transform the region. Encounters with indigenous peoples may also have made staying difficult. The sagas describe meetings that included trade, tension, and conflict. These stories must be read carefully, but they suggest that relations were not always peaceful. For the Norse, conflict so far from home would have been a serious problem. They could not easily call for help. They could not quickly replace losses. Indigenous communities had local knowledge and deeper connection to the land. The Norse may have decided that the risk was too high. Resources also mattered. The Vikings were practical. If a journey brought useful goods, it could be worth repeating. But if the cost was too high, people might stop. The North Atlantic was dangerous. Ships could be lost. Men could die. Supplies could run out. Even if North America had wood and other resources, the journey may not have been profitable enough to support permanent settlement. Exploration is exciting in stories, but in real life, survival and cost decide many things. Over time, Norse Greenland itself became weaker. Climate, trade changes, isolation, and other pressures made life harder there. If Greenland struggled, then voyages farther west became even harder to maintain. The chain that connected Norway, Iceland, Greenland, and North America depended on each link. When one link weakened, the whole route became less stable. This may help explain why the Viking presence in North America faded, but even though the Norse did not stay, their journey still mattered. Lonso Meadows proved that people from Europe reached North America long before Columbus. It showed that the Atlantic was crossed earlier than many once believed. It connected Old Norse stories with physical evidence in Canadian soil. It also reminds us that history can be hidden for centuries, waiting under grass, stone, and earth. The Viking story also teaches us to look at exploration carefully. It is easy to make the story simple and say, the Vikings discovered North America, but that is not the best way to tell it. Indigenous peoples were already there. Their histories were older, deeper, and central to the land. The Norse arrival was important because it was an early European contact with North America, not because it began the history of the continent. A respectful history remembers both facts. This is the final lesson from the Viking journey. Reaching a new land is not the same as understanding it. Crossing the sea is not the same as belonging to the shore. The Vikings had courage, ships, and shield. They crossed dangerous waters and reached Newfoundland. But distance, small numbers, local resistance, limited support, and harsh conditions made permanent settlement difficult. Today, the Viking journey remains powerful because it feels both real and mysterious. We can imagine the wooden ships, the cold waves, the nervous sailors, the first sight of land, and the small settlement on the coast. We can also imagine the silence after they left. The buildings disappeared. The stories became old. The land continued. And then, many centuries later, people found the traces and understood that something extraordinary had happened there. Thank you for listening to this story. Now, write one simple sentence in the comments. You can write, I learned that the Vikings reached North America before Columbus, but they did not stay forever. Keep listening, keep learning, and I will see you in the next story.